My daughter-in-law, Clara, looked me straight in the eye and said, "You don't fit in with our Christmas. You make us look old-fashioned." I stood there frozen, clutching the gingerbread cookies I had baked from a recipe passed down through generations. My son, David, didn't defend me. He just lowered his eyes as if ashamed of me. In that moment, I realized I wasn't a guest in my own family. I was a burden. But what Clara didn't know was that the house she dreamed of inheriting was still mine to decide, and I had already made a plan. When Clara's cruel words sank in, I felt my heart ache in a way that no doctor could treat. Yet I didn't answer her. I carried the tray of cookies back to the kitchen, pretending I had forgotten something, and quietly placed them on the counter. My hands trembled, not from age or weakness, but from the humiliation of being dismissed in front of strangers. For a moment, I closed my eyes and told myself that maybe Clara hadn't meant it the way it sounded, but the sting in her tone replayed in my ears like a cruel echo. "My name is Margaret. I am 67 years old, a widow, and for more than 30 years I worked as a nurse. I cared for people at their weakest, washed the elderly when no one else would, held the hands of strangers in their last breaths. I gave my compassion freely because that was who I was. After my husband Thomas died 5 years ago, I thought I could continue on my own. I tried, but a minor stroke last winter shook me harder than any grief. My hands weren't as steady. My balance wavered. The doctor suggested I should not live alone anymore. David, my only son, insisted I come live with him and Clara. He had said the words every mother longs to hear. "Mom, it'll be good for us. We want you here." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I told myself that maybe Clara and I could build a closer bond, that she might see me as part of her family instead of just an addition to it. The first time I stepped into their house, I was impressed. A grand entryway with polished hardwood floors, an open staircase, chandeliers glistening above. Clara had a taste for perfection. Sleek white furniture, velvet curtains, scented candles in every corner. It wasn't a home so much as a showroom. My small 2-bedroom house had been cozy and warm. This place felt cold despite all its lights. December had turned their neighborhood into a glittering wonderland. Every house on the street displayed festive wreaths, candy cane lights, and glowing reindeer. But Clara wanted more than festive. She wanted sophisticated. She called it her fancy Christmas. That meant white and silver ornaments instead of colorful ones, gourmet hors d'oeuvres instead of simple gingerbread men, and a guest list filled with David's colleagues and Clara's social circle. I tried to contribute. I offered to make the gingerbread cookies that had been in our family for generations. When I first mentioned it, Clara smiled tightly and said, "That's sweet, Margaret, but maybe we should stick to something more elegant this year." Her words were polite, but her eyes said, "Don't interfere." I insisted gently and baked them anyway. The smell of cinnamon and ginger filled the kitchen, and for a brief moment, I felt alive again. I remembered Christmases with Thomas, how he would sneak into the kitchen to steal one warm cookie before dinner, grinning like a boy. I remembered David as a child covered in flour, laughing when the dough stuck to his little hands. Those memories gave me courage to bring the tray to the living room that night. But Clara's words cut those memories in half. She had humiliated me in front of her guests, making sure everyone knew that I was out of place in her carefully curated world. David's silence was worse than her cruelty. My son, the boy I had rocked to sleep, the man I had sacrificed for, couldn't find one word to defend me. I stood there, my throat tightening, feeling as though I had been erased from my own family. I carried myself with dignity back to the kitchen. When I placed the cookies down, I forced a smile, as if it hadn't mattered. Old habits die hard. I had always put on a brave face for patience, for my husband, for my son. But this time the mask cracked. Alone, I leaned against the counter and let my breath shake. Later that evening, I tried again to help, offering to hang a few ornaments. "Oh, don't worry about it," Clara said, waving her hand as though brushing away a child. "We've got a theme going here. I don't want the tree looking mismatched. She didn't need to finish the sentence. What she meant was clear. I don't want the tree looking like you touched it. I withdrew quietly. I went up to the guest room they had given me. It was beautiful, yes, large bed, spotless sheets, a view of the snowy yard, but it didn't feel mine. Nothing in that house felt mine. I sat on the bed and stared at the framed photos Clara had arranged on the hallway wall, smiling pictures of her, David, and their friends. Not one included me. For years, I thought that being a mother meant your place in your child's life was unquestionable. Tonight, for the first time, I wondered if I had been wrong. I had given David my best years, my sleepless nights, my energy, and my love. And here I was, being told I didn't belong. I lay down, pulling the blanket over me, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Clara's voice. You don't fit in. You don't fit in. It was more than just words. It was rejection. It was erasure. I turned to look at the photo of Thomas on my nightstand, the only thing I had brought from my old home. His face, frozen in time, seemed to look back at me with quiet strength. What would you say now, Tom? I whispered. Would you tell me to endure this, or would you tell me to fight back? My hand brushed against the small folder I had placed in the drawer, documents I had carried with me when I moved. Property papers, bank information, things Clara didn't know I had. I hadn't looked at them in months. But tonight, after Clara's words, something inside me shifted. I closed the drawer and forced myself to rest. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would smile again. Tomorrow, I would play the role of the quiet mother-in-law. But deep down, beneath the calm surface, something had already begun to stir. Little did I know that was only the beginning. The next evening, Clara's party was in full bloom. The house sparkled with white lights and polished glassware. Waiters in crisp shirts floated through the crowd with trays of champagne and delicate appetizers. Clara glided from guest to guest, her laughter rising above the music, the perfect hostess in her elegant red dress. I sat quietly in the corner of the living room, my lap folded with the dish towel I still held from the kitchen. I had baked the gingerbread again that day, unable to resist the tradition that meant so much to me. The smell had filled the house, reminding me of every Christmas past. Thomas's smile, David's giggles as a boy, all of it lingered in the warm scent. I thought perhaps tonight would be different. Perhaps Clara, in front of her guests, would soften. Perhaps David would remember what those cookies meant. With cautious hope, I rose and carried the tray into the living room. The cookies sat in neat rows, their sugar-dusted tops glistening under the lights. I moved slowly, my heart pounding, my lips pressed into a small smile. I thought maybe the guests would enjoy a taste of something traditional, I said gently, my voice almost drowned by the chatter. Clara turned, her expression freezing. She looked at the cookies, then at me. A faint curl touched her lips, but it wasn't a smile. It was disdain. Sorry, she said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. This isn't your style. And honestly, you don't fit in with our Christmas. The words cut deeper than any knife. For a moment, the room fell quiet, and then came the awkward chuckles of guests who didn't know where to look. One man coughed, a woman glanced down at her drink. The silence from my son was the loudest sound of all. David stood nearby, glass in hand, eyes fixed on the floor. He said nothing, not a word in my defense. I felt my cheeks flush with heat, though the rest of me went cold. My hands trembled, and I nearly dropped the tray. A lifetime of memories, the nights working double shifts to pay for David's college, the meals I had skipped so he could have enough, the nights by his bedside when he was sick, flashed before me. And now, here I was, reduced to an embarrassment, an old woman out of place at her own family's table. I forced my lips into what must have looked like a smile, though inside, everything was breaking. Of course, I whispered. I turned back toward the kitchen, each step heavier than the last. Behind me, Clara resumed her laughter. The music swelled again, and the conversation picked up as if nothing had happened. In the kitchen, I placed the tray down on the counter with care, as though handling something fragile, though it was really my own dignity that I was trying not to shatter. I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. My eyes burned, and before I could stop them, tears slipped down my cheeks. Quickly, I brushed them away. No one would see me cry. Not Clara. Not David. Not anyone. I stood there for a long moment staring at the cookies. They looked so small, so ordinary now. Symbols of love turned into evidence of rejection. I thought of Thomas again, his deep voice urging me to be strong. But strength felt far away. I wiped my hands on the towel and steadied my breath. When I turned, my eyes caught the framed photographs along the hallway wall, the perfect family portraits Clara had curated. Smiles polished for the camera, expensive outfits, vacation backdrops, and in every single one, I was absent. I walked slowly down the hall, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. At the end hung a single photograph of David as a boy, one Clara had overlooked in her quest for perfection. He was no more than 6, sitting on Thomas's shoulders, grinning ear to ear. That was the David I had raised. That was the boy I had loved so fiercely. Where had he gone? I stopped in front of the larger portrait of Thomas and me on our wedding day that David had insisted we hang in the hallway years ago. Clara had left it there out of courtesy, perhaps, but it looked out of place among the sleek frames. My gaze locked on Thomas's familiar smile, the twinkle in his eyes. For a moment, I almost heard his voice. "You're stronger than this, Margaret," it whispered in my memory. But even his imagined encouragement couldn't erase the sting. The words Clara had thrown at me repeated in my mind, over and over. "You don't fit in. You don't fit in." I wondered what Thomas would say if he could see me now, humiliated in front of strangers, dismissed by the woman who had married our son, abandoned by the boy we had raised together. Would he tell me to endure for David's sake, or would he tell me that even a mother deserves respect? My breath hitched, and I pressed my hand against the photo frame as though steadying myself. "If you were here," I whispered, "you wouldn't let them treat me like this." The laughter from the living room echoed down the hallway, cruel in its cheerfulness. And there I stood, invisible in the house where I was supposed to belong. If you were in my place, what would you feel right now? After that humiliating night, Clara's rules began to creep into my daily life. Quiet at first, then sharper, like barbed wire closing around me. The first came in the kitchen. I had always loved cooking, the rhythm of chopping vegetables, the warmth of a simmering pot. One evening, as I reached for the kettle to make tea, Clara's voice floated from the doorway. "Margaret, could you maybe keep the kitchen free after 8? It helps us keep things tidy for the next day." I turned, mug in hand, unsure if I'd heard correctly. She smiled sweetly, but the sharpness in her eyes told the truth. It wasn't a request. It was a rule. I nodded and set the mug down, retreating to my room with the faint taste of defeat on my tongue. It didn't stop there. Whenever guests arrived, Clara made a point of pulling David aside and whispering, but loud enough for me to hear, "Let's give Mom some space upstairs. It's better for her to rest than mingle." I would sit in my room, listening to the sounds of laughter below, the clink of glasses, the faint swell of music. My son's voice was among them, but it never rose for me. The worst came during meals. Clara arranged the table with precision, silverware aligned, glasses polished, seats assigned. When I tried to sit at the long dining table one evening, she paused, smiled tightly, and said, "Oh, Margaret, we thought you might be more comfortable at the small table in the kitchen. It's quieter there." Her tone was coated in sugar, but the sting was bitter. I felt my face flush. David glanced at me but quickly looked away, his silence as sharp as any insult. I forced a nod and moved to the smaller table. Alone, I ate quietly while voices drifted from the dining room, growing fainter with every bite. That was when I knew. I was no longer family. I was a boarder. A tolerated guest, tolerated only because of what I represented. Nights grew colder in that house. I would sit on the edge of my bed, staring at the shadows crawling across the walls, wondering how love could dissolve so completely. I thought of the years I had sacrificed, working late shifts, patching shoes instead of buying new ones, denying myself luxuries so David could thrive. Every sacrifice had led to this house, this family, this life. And now, here I was, shoved into the corner of it. But fate has a way of showing its hand when you least expect it. One night, long after the guests had left and the house had fallen quiet, I slipped downstairs for a glass of water. The lights in the living room were still on, faint, golden. I heard voices, Clara's sharp and whispering, David's lower and hesitant. I froze in the hallway, my hand still gripping the banister. Clara's words cut through the silence. Just endure her. A few more years, that's all. When she's gone, the house is ours. My breath caught. The glass slipped from my fingers and shattered quietly against the floor, but they didn't hear. My heart pounded so loudly I feared it might give me away. David's reply came, soft but devastating. I know. I just wish it was easier. I pressed my back against the wall, feeling as if it would swallow me whole. My son, my only son, was not defending me, not protesting, not saying she's my mother, not a burden. No, he was agreeing, quietly, passively, but agreeing. I fled up the stairs before they could see me. My legs shook as I closed my bedroom door behind me. Inside, the silence pressed heavy against my ears. I sat at the desk, my hands trembling as I reached for the drawer. Inside lay the folder I had carried when I moved here. Deeds, bank statements, documents that Clara didn't know I possessed. For the first time since moving in, I opened it fully. My fingers traced the embossed seal of the property deed, my name standing alone in bold print. Not David's, not Clara's, mine. The realization hit with force. They weren't waiting for me to belong. They were waiting for me to vanish. I had been reduced to a countdown clock, a barrier between them and their prize. Every smile Clara gave, every silence David offered, every small rule pressed upon me, it was all about the house, my house. I sank into the chair, clutching the papers like a lifeline. My tears no longer came. Instead, something colder, harder rose in me, a seed of defiance buried deep but awakening now. I looked around the room, sterile, beautiful, empty, and felt the walls close in. They thought I was powerless, a shadow in their home. They thought my days were numbered, that they only needed patience. But they didn't know me. They didn't know the strength that years of caring for others had built in me. I folded the papers carefully and placed them back in the folder. Then I sat in the dark, hands resting on the cover, staring into the silence. My reflection in the window was no longer a tired woman, but something sharper, eyes burning in the dim light. What I found next, I whispered to myself, changed everything. Christmas Eve arrived with an almost theatrical sparkle. The snow outside lay thick and glittering. Lights blinked from every corner of the house, and the smell of roasted meats drifted through the air. Clara was in her element, directing staff, polishing glasses, adjusting ornaments on the grand white tree, as if the smallest imperfection would ruin the evening. Guests arrived wrapped in furs and laughter, and the house filled with chatter and clinking glasses. I remained upstairs in my room, just as Clara suggested, though suggested was really ordered. She had said it with that sweetened edge to her voice. "Margaret, why don't you rest tonight? These parties can be so overwhelming. It'll be better for you to stay upstairs." I nodded at the time, playing the obedient guest. But as the sound of voices swelled beneath me, I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The joy below felt like a knife carving me out of the picture. I stared at the photograph of Thomas on my nightstand. Memories pulled me back to the Christmases we had shared. Me stirring the cookie dough while he rolled it into uneven shapes. David running around in pajamas with flour smudged across his cheeks. We used to stay up past midnight singing carols off-key, laughing until our stomachs hurt. It was messy, imperfect, and beautiful. That was Christmas. That was family. Now here I was, alone in a room that wasn't mine, listening to the echo of strangers celebrating in what was supposed to be my son's home. My chest tightened until I could hardly breathe. For a moment, grief threatened to crush me. Then, just as quickly, something else surged up. Resolve. I rose, went to the drawer, and pulled out the envelope. Inside it was more than paper. It was the weight of my life's choices, the culmination of years of sacrifice and the key to my freedom. I held it against my chest for a moment, inhaling deeply, before I made my way to the door. The music and laughter grew louder as I descended the stairs. Conversations faltered when people noticed me. A few smiled politely, others simply looked away. Clara turned, her face tightening for just a second before she forced a bright smile. "Margaret," she said too sweetly, "you should be resting." "I've rested enough," I answered, my voice steady. For the first time in years, my voice didn't shake. All eyes turned toward me as I stepped into the center of the room. I could feel David's confusion, his brow furrowed, his drink still in his hand. I reached the long dining table covered in silver and crystal and laid the envelope down in front of them. "What's this?" Clara asked, her tone brittle. "A Christmas gift," I said simply, "for the family." Her manicured fingers tore open the flap, pulling out the documents. As her eyes scanned the words, her face drained of color. David leaned closer, his jaw tightening as realization struck. Gasps rippled around the room as Clara stammered, This can't be real." But it was. The contract was final, the ink long dried. The house they thought they were waiting for was no longer theirs to expect. I had sold it to a young couple, eager to start their life together. The money had already been divided, a large donation to the nursing scholarship fund in honor of my years in the hospital, and the rest safely placed in my own account. Enough for me to live freely, without begging for space in anyone's home. "You can't do this," Clara's voice cracked, rising above the stunned silence. She looked wild now, stripped of her polished exterior. I looked at her, calm as the snow falling outside, and let a small smile touch my lips. "Can't I?" The room was silent except for the faint hum of the Christmas carols playing through the speakers. Clara stood frozen, papers trembling in her hand. David staring at me as though he had never seen me before. I turned toward the guests, their eyes wide with shock, their champagne glasses half raised mid-toast. "Merry Christmas," I said softly, my voice clear. "May yours be filled with love and respect." No one spoke. Even the music seemed quieter. I glanced once more at the photo of Thomas on the wall. For the first time in years, I felt as though he was standing beside me, nodding in approval. I had not raised my voice. I had not begged. I had simply reminded them that I was not powerless. The party continued, but not with the same cheer. Whispers spread like fire. Clara's face burned red, her perfect facade cracking. David set his glass down, unable to look me in the eyes. I walked toward the door, my steps steady. The envelope no longer in my hands, but my dignity firmly back where it belonged. Behind me, Clara's cry echoed. "You've ruined everything." Perhaps I had, for her, but for me, I had saved what mattered. Clara's scream shattered the silence left in the wake of my revelation. "Your mother ruined everything," she spat, her voice breaking, her hands waving the contract like torn wings. Her face twisted, her perfect hair falling loose from its pins, and she turned on David. "Do something. Fix this. Tell her she can't just—" David stood frozen, his mouth opening then closing. He glanced at me, then at Clara, and for once, I saw the truth written plainly on his face. Shame. Not for what I had done, but for what he had failed to do. He had watched, year after year, as his wife humiliated me, and he had chosen silence. Now the silence had betrayed him too. He began, but the words never formed. His eyes lowered, shoulders slumping under the weight of everything unsaid. Clara shoved him in the chest. You let her do this. You stood there and let her sell the house we were supposed to inherit. Her words rang out like a slap, echoing through the stunned guests who whispered behind their hands, their eyes darting between us. Clara had dropped her mask entirely now, her polished charm stripped away, leaving only the greed beneath. Enough, I said, my voice firm but not loud. The chatter died instantly. It was never your house, Clara, it was mine, and now it belongs to people who will treat it like a home, not a trophy. Clara's lips parted, but no sound came. For once, she had no script, no cutting remark, just fury. I turned to David, my son, my boy who had once clung to my skirt when he was frightened of storms. He looked at me with an ache in his eyes, as if he wanted to apologize, as if the words were there but couldn't escape. I felt the weight of decades pressing between us, every bedtime story, every scraped knee I had kissed, every sacrifice. It all led to this moment, where the distance between us was wider than ever. I picked up my small suitcase from beside the stairs. I had packed it earlier, knowing that once the truth was laid bare, I could not stay here another night. The gasps around the room followed me as I walked slowly toward the door. My back was straight, my steps deliberate. "Mother, wait," David said softly. But it was too late. I didn't turn back. The cold air hit me like a cleansing wave as I stepped outside. Snowflakes swirled in the night, settling on my coat, my hair. For a moment, I simply stood there on the porch, listening to the muffled chaos still erupting inside. I drew in a long, sharp breath of winter air, letting it fill my lungs, letting it wash out the suffocating weight of the house I was leaving behind. My chest still ached. The wound of betrayal was raw, the sting of rejection still sharp. Yet under it all, there was something else, something lighter, a strange, almost fragile sense of freedom. I was no longer bound to that house, to those unspoken chains. I stepped down the walkway, my suitcase rolling softly against the snow-packed ground. From behind the frosted glass, I could see figures moving frantically, Clara's hands waving, David standing still. Their voices blurred into nothing against the quiet night. On the street, a car passed slowly, its headlights casting golden beams over the snow. I paused at the curb, watching the flakes catch the light before melting into the darkness. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, my breath catching at the name on the screen, my attorney. A short message appeared. The other document is also secured. I stared at the words, the corners of my lips lifting ever so slightly. The contract I had revealed tonight was only one part of the truth. There was more, waiting, tucked away in safekeeping. Clara thought she had lost everything already. She didn't know the depth of the rug that had been pulled from beneath her feet. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked up at the falling snow. The night was silent now, save for the whisper of flakes landing softly around me. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without permission, without waiting for someone else to grant me space. I tightened my grip on the handle of my suitcase and began walking, each step crunching against the untouched snow. The cold nipped at my skin, but I welcomed it. It reminded me I was alive, that I was moving forward, not trapped anymore in a house that had long ceased to feel like home. Behind me, the mansion loomed, glittering and hollow. Ahead of me lay the unknown, but it was mine. And mine alone. The snow crunched softly beneath my boots as I left that house behind, suitcase trailing after me. I didn't look back. The cold stung my cheeks, but inside I felt lighter, as if years of invisible weight had been lifted. By the time the cab I had called carried me away from the glittering neighborhood, the mansion was no more than a fading glow in the distance, swallowed by the night. 2 weeks later, I opened the door to a very different kind of home. The senior living community was warm and bustling, with a front lobby decorated in reds and greens, the air carrying the scent of cinnamon and pine. A woman with kind eyes greeted me. "Welcome, Margaret. We're so glad you're here." Her tone was genuine, not forced, not laced with condescension. My new apartment was modest, just 2 rooms, a small kitchen, and a balcony overlooking the snowy courtyard. Yet the moment I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Boxes were unpacked quickly, and on the shelf above my bed, I placed the photo of Thomas, his smile watching over me once again. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn into activities I had once thought were beyond me. Yoga classes stretched my body gently, reminding me that strength could return even after weakness. In the baking group, I shared my gingerbread recipe, and for the first time in years, others leaned in eagerly asking for tips, complimenting the aroma. When we pulled the trays from the oven, warm and golden, the laughter that filled the kitchen wasn't mocking, it was joyful. I wasn't invisible here. I wasn't a burden. I was a friend, a mentor, a woman with stories worth hearing. Each morning I woke with a purpose. Each evening I went to bed with a smile. I was no longer enduring life. I was living it. Still, one final piece of my plan lingered in silence, known only to me and my attorney. The message I had received that snowy night had been the quiet seal on my final act of defiance. The other document wasn't just the sale contract, it was my will. Clara and David would not inherit a single cent. Every dollar, every asset I still owned would be transferred to a charitable trust and a scholarship fund for nursing students. The profession that had given me a life, the work I had poured my soul into, would continue to thrive through others. I imagined the day Clara might discover it. Perhaps she would storm into a lawyer's office expecting to claim what was hers, only to be told that her name wasn't mentioned anywhere in the will. I imagined David's face, caught between shame and regret. Would he finally understand what he had lost? Or would he simply move on empty-handed alongside the woman who had driven a wedge into his family? The truth was, I no longer cared for their reactions. My revenge, if it could be called that, wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice, about reclaiming my worth, about ensuring that what I had built in my life would not feed greed but nurture kindness. One evening, as snow fell gently outside, I sat by my window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the flakes gather on the sill. My heart felt strangely full, not of bitterness, but of calm acceptance. Thomas's picture sat on the table beside me, his eyes twinkling as though he approved. I whispered softly, "Family isn't about blood. It's about love, respect, and truth." The words lingered in the quiet room, settling into me like a prayer, like a final vow. Some nights the ache of betrayal returned, a shadow that crept across my chest. But then laughter would echo from down the hall, or a neighbor would knock on my door with a slice of pie, and I would remember I was not alone. I was surrounded by people who valued me simply for being me. I thought of David sometimes, of the boy I had raised, and the man he had become. Forgiveness was a complicated word. Did I forgive him? Perhaps, in part. I understood the weakness of silence, the way love could twist into something unrecognizable under pressure. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean I would erase the pain of that Christmas. The snow kept falling, blanketing the world in white. As I watched, I felt my lips curve into a smile. I had survived humiliation, betrayal, and abandonment. And yet, here I was, still standing, still breathing, still finding joy. If you were me, would you forgive them? Or would you do the same as I did?